We just recently started our kind of mini sermon series, Always, focusing on a portion of Paul's letters to the Thessalonians, and I guess his first letter. And Paul's kind of an interesting character because he kind of had a terrible life, but he never really let it get to him. He kind of later in life realized that everything that he had ever earned and ever found worth in was nothing, and everything, all of the time that he had invested in his career was completely thrown away, and he had a complete 180 into a life of being in prison a lot, being shipwrecked, just not a very good life if you were to measure it up against other people's lives. But in all of that, he just kind of had this just theme of joy that he was always writing to the churches that were just starting up, joy and thanksgiving. And he mentions it here in 1 Thessalonians. He says, "Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." So he uses this word always 3 times, and it's a pretty strong word. Jim Bob talked about it last week. It's pretty all-encompassing. Doesn't leave anything out. We're supposed to be thankful all the time. All the time. And so this week I started thinking about what does it look like to be thankful all the time? What that actually looked like, played out in somebody's life. And so it got me online, searching and stuff. And there was a lot online about teaching kids to be thankful. And I thought it was interesting that was like more than 50% of the websites on thankfulness were teaching kids to be thankful. And I think it's because that's not a trait that children are just born with. There are things that children kind of figure out on their own. Like, you don't have to teach a baby to lie. It's just gonna do it. Eventually, it's gonna look you in the face and tell you a lie. Or trying to manipulate you to get what it wants. It's something that a child just learns to do. Just grows up doing. But thankfulness has to be taught. And I think it really comes from the way kids are raised. They come into this world pretty useless. Just like a hunk of meat that you have to take care of. They're not very strong. They have short attention spans. They can be entertaining, but since the child labor laws in the 1930s, you can't make a lot of money off of that. So we're stuck with these little people who don't have a lot of ambition to take care of themselves. But in all seriousness, it's something that I've thought about a lot lately because my wife and I are expecting in May, and I'm going to have this little life in my house that is completely dependent on me for everything. I will have to provide every single thing for that person so that they can grow up. And as a father, I'm not looking at just what the child needs. I want to be able to provide anything that I possibly can. But children, if they have good parents, they grow up in this environment where everything is taken care of for them, and they don't ever really have to worry about anything. And especially as babies, they can't say thank you. So it's something that we end up having to teach them later on in life. And I think it's become a problem with this generation. We never really grow out of that childhood stage of expecting. Like we deserve the things that we have and more. And it's really sad because we have so much right now. We use stuff on a daily basis that if you were to show it to somebody 100 years ago, it would just blow their mind that something like that would even exist. And yet we just use it every day like it's nothing, and then get upset whenever things break. The fact that we can go to a coffee shop and order coffee from anywhere in the world, just pick a spot and they have coffee and somebody else makes it for you, and while you're waiting on your coffee, you pull out your phone, and through the air, you have access to the entirety of the human species knowledge. Just like there on your phone through the air. And then you get upset because you have to wait for your South American drink for more than 30 seconds. I mean, it kind of gets ridiculous, but we've all been there. There's a comedian, and he's not recommendable, but he had an interview with Conan O'Brien, and I thought he made some really good points talking about this generation. He said, we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the worst generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. And flying is the worst flying is the worst one because people come back from flights and they tell you their stories, and it's like a horror story. They're like, it was the worst day of my life. First of all, we didn't board for 20 minutes, and then we get on the plane and they make us sit there on the runway for 40 minutes. And we just have to sit there, and they say there are delays on flights. Delays, really? New York to California in 5 hours? That used to take 30 years to do that. And bunches of people would die, and some people would have babies. And you'd be a whole different group when you get there. Now you watch a movie, you take a nap, and you're home. So we get back to the first question. What does it look like to give thanks? To live a life of thankfulness or gratefulness? So, first step, you always pull up the Apple Dictionary and you type in thanks. And if you type that in, the definition for thanks is an expression of gratitude. Well, that has words that I don't understand, so then you type in gratitude, and it says the quality of being thankful. And it has a little bit more readiness to show appreciation, but we're really close to a circular definition there where it's kind of ambiguous, the meaning. So, me being an academic, I like to dig a little bit deeper, and I learned about a few philosophers back in the mid-1900s who were really interested in this question of what is thankfulness, because thankfulness and gratefulness is not an easy thing to pin down. And so they asked questions like, is gratitude an emotion, an attitude? Is it like a moral virtue? Or is it just like a personality trait? Some people are more grateful than others and there's nothing you can do about it. Or maybe it's a coping mechanism for people who aren't quite all together. And there were a couple of similar ones that I really liked. Two of these guys, Barochi and Miller, they described gratitude as the willingness to recognize the earned increments of value in one experience. So, we all have value in our life, things that we cherish. And so gratitude is recognizing that those things that we have, first you have to recognize that you have them. They're unearned. We didn't do necessarily anything to receive them. And then Robert Solomon, he kind of had one I think was a little bit easier. An estimate of gain coupled with the judgment that someone else is responsible for that gain. So first we realize that we have value, we've gained something, and then we're not responsible for that gain. So here we are. Living a life of thankfulness means always thinking about the good things in life. Always thinking about the value that you have. The holidays coming up, your wife and kids. Thankful for the fact that you can read. Or maybe that you live in Northwest Arkansas and we have really great seasons. Or even the simple things like a nice cup of coffee and a really fresh donut. You spend your day thinking about these things and realizing that you're not responsible for any of it. That even though you might have had a part in it, you're not the reason behind it. So, we need to be thankful. And you might kind of have the reaction, like Jim Bob told last week, the story of a man and Ironside sitting there eating, and Ironside said his prayer, and Other guy said, oh, you're one of those who thanks God for his food. I work for my food, and I provide, and so the only person I'm grateful for is myself. And people have that attitude. And I'm not saying there are hard-working people in this world, but we are so blessed, it's unimaginable. So if you kind of fall into that category, where you feel like you've earned a lot of what you have, or maybe you're a pessimist and you say, my life's just not really great right now, I don't have a lot to be thankful for. I've got a verse for you. It's in Psalms 100. It's actually the chapter of Psalms 100. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful song. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his court with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. So we can be thankful for the simple fact that we were made, crafted by God, that we exist right now, not by just some random chance or anything that we did, but that he made us and we're his. And even though a lot of times we just act like stupid sheep, we have a shepherd that created the universe. And not just that, but he's good. He's a good shepherd. He takes care of us. And even when we can't feel it, he's there and he loves us. And when we turn around and walk as far away as we possibly can from him, if we turn back around, he's right there. Because he's faithful. So every day we should count our blessings. Name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God has done. No, but seriously, you should try to spend a portion of your day, just sit down and list the blessings in your life. And you don't have to go crazy, because I'm sure you could fill page after page after page. But to just sit down and write down up to 5 blessings, you'll benefit from it. It's science. It's also the Bible first, but it's also science. A couple of guys, Robert Emmons and Michael McCullough, they released a study back in 2003, and it was titled Counting Blessings versus Burdens, an experimental investigation of gratitude and subjective well-being in daily life. So we're not going to read it, I'm just going to break it down, so don't worry. But the way these guys did this study is, they got some participants to agree to be part of this. And they broke them up into groups. In the first group, they asked to take time every day and write down up to 5 blessings. And just things that they were grateful for. There was no stipulation on what they might be. Just 5 blessings. And then another group, they asked that they would take a moment of their day to sit down and write up to, or list up to, 5 things that annoyed them that happened that day. That just really got under their skin. And then they had a control group. And then after these people wrote down their list of however many they got to up to 5, then they were asked questions about their life. How they felt, what was their outlook, things like that. And they got some really interesting information from this study. And we can look at this and see what happens in our life whenever we're thankful. Because this will happen. Alright? And it's the first blank. First off, a life of thanks is joyful. Does that kid have any control over what's happening? No. Just along for the ride. So, and I think this was kind of the main finding that they were looking for in their study from the beginning. And if we read it, it says, in study 1, we found that a weekly benefit listing, that was listing things we were thankful for, was associated with more positive and optimistic appraisals of one's life, more time spent exercising, and fewer reported physical symptoms. In study 2, self-guided daily gratitude exercises were associated with higher levels of positive effect. They also, other places in the paper listed it increases the amount of time you sleep at night and how refreshed you wake up in the morning. It was crazy, the things that they found out. But just sitting down every day and writing a list of things that you're thankful for. And that's, if you miss it, the first blank is, a life of thanks is joyful. So these people are happier. They're performing this task that they were asked to do. This isn't necessarily something that they just decided to do in life, right? They were told by someone to sit down every day and write things that they were happy about. But when it was all said and done, they were happier because of it. They had a more positive outlook on life. Because when you focus on the good things, you start seeing how good things are. We can look back at Psalms 100 and see a little bit of a connection. It says, the first 3 verses, "Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful song. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture." So we might view these statements about joy as a commandment, right? But it's not always easy to just be happy. It's like a state of mind. You can force a smile, but forced smiles are like the worst thing in the world. They don't fool anybody. You're not getting away with anything. Everybody knows you're miserable. But on the other hand, we see that when we're thankful, happiness is a product of that. It's not necessarily something you have to force. You just have to make a list of the things that you're thankful for. So, are things at work not really going the way that you would like them to go? Make a list of things that you're thankful for. Is your marriage rough right now and it just seems like there's nothing that you can do to make things better? Make a list of things that you're thankful for. Is school just really getting to you and you have that one professor who just doesn't understand how tough your life is right now? You just need to make a list of things that you're grateful for. And you might say, like, I don't want to be insincere. If I'm not really thankful, isn't it wrong of me to pretend and write down a list? And I want to point you guys towards John Piper. Check this out. He says, "Do not say, but it is hypocritical to thank God with my tongue when I don't feel thankful in my heart. There is such a thing as hypocritical thanksgiving. Its aim is to conceal ingratitude and get the praise of men. That is not your aim. Your aim is loosing your tongue with words of gratitude. Your aim in loosing your tongues with words of gratitude is that God would be merciful and fill your words with the emotion of true gratitude. You are not seeking the praise of men. You are seeing the mercy of God. You are not hiding the hardness of ingratitude, but hoping for the inbreaking of the Spirit. Thanksgiving with the mouth stirs up thankfulness in the heart." And that makes this whole situation crazy, because if we try to be more thankful, then we naturally become more thankful, which makes us happier people. And when you're happier, it's easier to see things that you're grateful for. And when you're more grateful, you're more happy, and you're caught in this crazy merry-go-round of happy. So that's one thing. The second observation that they made in the research was that a life of thanks is obvious. And this was kind of interesting to me. It was something that the researchers kind of threw in at the last minute. They needed something else to add to the paper to make it, like more substantial for submission. So they decided that they were going to ask the people living with these subjects, or like their significant others, they were going to ask them questions about the subject's life. And they found these data indicate that the benefits of the gratitude listing, that's writing down the things you're thankful for, in comparison with a control group, transcend self-perception and are evident at least to significant others. So at least to the people they asked, it was obvious to those people that these subjects making these lists were happier people. Their lives were different. So these benefits, these increased happiness and life satisfaction, they're not just part of your life, but they're obvious to other people. And I've always kind of considered thankfulness like an attitude that I should work on. You know, like I try to pray before meals, and so if I'm in public, I kind of bow my head and pray quietly to myself. A little act of thankfulness. But what it's saying here is if you're really living a life of thankfulness, the people around you won't be able to help but see it. They'll see it in your life. They'll see how happy that you become. Because a life of thanks stands in stark contrast to a life of complaints. Let's be honest. If you're not thankful, you're complaining. Right? It's one or the other. There's no middle ground. You're either thankful about it or there's something about it that you just can't stand. And it just feels natural. I went to a conference recently with Jim, Bob, and Mark, and there's a fiery little woman there named Christine Kane, and she has a really interesting story. Too much of a story to even go into, but she was talking about the passing of Baton and how crucial that part of a race is. You have a small gap and you've got to pass the baton from one racer to the other. And she was using that as an analogy of the responsibilities of one generation being passed to the next. And that happening all the time, but especially right now. We have an older generation passing that baton to a younger generation. And she specifically talked about in Hebrews, because the writer of Hebrews uses a race analogy too, and talks about this race that we're meant to run, and that we should throw away all the weight and sin that so easily entangles us. Things that keep you from running, you should get rid of them. And it mentions weight and sin, so they're different. And she talked about the weight of this generation is the weight of entitlement. That we don't necessarily want that responsibility because maybe it's beneath us, or it's not something that we really had in mind for the rest of our life, and so we just want something better. We're not thankful for that opportunity. Like I said earlier, it's just apparent in the world around us. It's like we're owed something that we never deserved in the first place, and it comes out in popular culture. There's a meme that's popular right now on the internet called "First World Problems." And you might have seen one. It's just like it's a woman crying, and then it lists her problem. And here's one of them. The super glue cap is super glued to the super glue. Is it not up there? Did we lose it? Oh man, that's too bad. It's a woman crying, like, if you can imagine, and there's tears. And that's her complaint, that the super glue cap is super glued to the super glue. Another one is, I don't have enough dip for my chips, but if I open another dip, then I won't have enough chips for my dip. Or someone wrote me a check and now I have to go to the bank. That's a problem we face a lot. Or I had too much of the bread at the Italian restaurant and now I can't eat my food. You ever run into that? My favorite one was, I have nothing at the house to drink but water. And it seems silly, and they get even worse and worse and more silly. But chances are you've heard somebody say something like that, something close to it. If you haven't said it yourself, like some complaint that's left your mouth, and then you've realized, oh, whoa, that was so terribly wrong for me to even complain about something so trivial. But it happens, and it's become part of our culture, right? We expect this certain level of comfort because, I mean, as a nation, we've worked to it. I'm not saying that you know, our hard work was for nothing, but we still need to realize that we never deserved it. We're not responsible for it. We're blessed to be born here. And so when somebody turns around and walks upstream against this sea of complaints, people are going to notice because it's so different. And, I don't want you to get me wrong. We're not after recognition from men. In fact, Jesus warns against it in Matthew 6. He says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. But the difference here is that he's warning against doing your acts of righteousness to be seen by other people. But that's not the case here. We live a life of thankfulness, and because we live that life, it's obvious to other people. It's not the intention, it's the outcome. Does that make sense? So be thankful. And then finally, and this was pretty interesting, a life of thanks is philanthropic. Oh man, you guys, I'll spell it. Philanthropic. Philanthropic. So I tried to just pick a word that would fit in one blank because I already had two that have one blank. But what that means is like doing good for other people. Having kind of a personal calling on your life to make other people's lives easier. And one of the things that this study found was that people led to focus on their blessings, those people that had to make the list of their blessings, were more likely to report having helped someone with a personal problem or offered emotional support to another, suggesting pro-social motivation as a consequence of the gratitude induction. So, that's saying, these people who made these lists of blessings, they were more likely to help the people in their life who needed it. More likely to help the people in their life. Because when I put my life into perspective, it's not about me anymore. Right? And when you start listing all the blessings in your life, your problems become so small. And once it's not about you, then you can look around and see the need in other people's lives. Because it's there. Right? We live in a broken world. And it's because of this that you hear stories like, a man I got to meet named Saul Camacho. He grew up in an orphanage in Mexico, and he pretty much overcame all odds, left the orphanage whenever he was old enough, I guess, to leave an orphanage. I don't know what that age is. And became the youngest head of medicine in the largest hospital in Mexico City. He had made a name for himself. And it was a really great life. And he married a woman who was at the orphanage with him whenever he was there, and they had a great family. And he was thankful for the opportunity that orphanage had given him. And so he gave up everything that he had, and he became the director of that that orphanage, so that other kids in his place could have the same types of opportunities. Or you hear stories like Patrick. Whenever he was just a little boy, he was kidnapped out of his home by thieves and taken to another country, Ireland, and he was sold into slavery. And slavery in Ireland was pretty rough because Ireland hadn't been civilized yet. They were still just clans, and it was pretty brutal. And Patrick faced death every day, and it taught him to pray. He said he would pray at least 100 times before he went to bed, and he would pray as many, if not more, before he fell asleep. And it's what got him through his years and years in Ireland. And finally, one day, whenever he was older, he got an opportunity to escape. And he ran back to his country, Great Britain, and everybody would have understood just fine if Patrick had said, forget Ireland, I never want to go back there, those are terrible people, they stole my childhood. But Patrick was thankful for the way his life was changed, because he would have never learned to pray like he learned to pray when his life was threatened. And he would have never had the relationship with God that he would have had when he faced death every day. And so he found it his personal call in life to go to Ireland and evangelize. And we know him now by his Catholic Church given name, St. Patrick. It's what the holiday is named after. Because he didn't go to Ireland with an army, like what happens so many times in history. It's sad. But he took his Bible and he said, I'm going to teach the Irish people to read using the Bible. Because he was thankful in the worst of situations. But the interesting thing is this isn't necessarily a Christian response. I mean, obviously some of these participants, subjects in this research were Christians, but not all of them were. And this was a state school with state professors. But there's something inside of us that's created in the image of God and knows that it's not us that did all of this. That we're not responsible for the good things that happen in our life. And then as a Christian, we realize that we're just undeserving individuals who were crafted by an eternal God. A God that saw our need for salvation and provided a price that we would never be able to pay because of where we were. And above all else, something to be thankful for is our place in this kingdom. Our future as part of His family. And be happy that our lives are never going to be the same. And that's going to be obvious to the people around us. And we as a church, we need to reach to the point where we're so thankful that we can't help but help the people around us. Because we have been loved with a love that needs to be shared.